Not yet.
Okay.
Right now.
Are you gonna just introduce us first?
We are live now, so over to you.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Mark. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Peck. I'm the founder and CEO of EndevourVR, and we are focused on XR enterprise scale, but also we are very, very interested. In fact, Ryan and I spend many hours talking about the metaverse and the future. So it's very fitting that we get to be together today chatting about this. Ryan Gill is the founder and CEO of Crucible, and we also have Lee Mason, who is a fantastic digital artist, otherwise known as Metageist. Welcome, gentlemen. Ryan.
Thank you.
Lee, how are you? So Ryan, can you tell us a little bit more about Crucible? And then Lee, I'd love to give you a moment to share a little bit more about some of your work.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Crucible is a company that me and my partner have been working on for about 2 years. Amy's been there since the beginning. She's an advisor. So when Mark asked who would be good for this conversation, she was the first name that came to mind. And we are a company that basically exists to create blueprints for the open metaverse. The idea is that the metaverse is inevitably coming over the next 10 years as kind of, the next phase of the internet as we use it, and it should be open and it should be built upon user sovereignty. So we kind of see Web3 as a lot of the keys for how this can happen. But right now, Web3, all this decentralized tech is not designed at all for game developers. And so we've kind of packaged all of that into a SDK for the game engine, and we hand it to them, and we'll see what they do with it.
Excellent. And Lee, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your work? And I've been doing a serious cyber stalk of your work, and it's really fantastic. So can you tell us a little bit about your work? And I've been doing a serious cyber stalk of your work, and it's really fantastic.
Thank you. It's a crazy story, but I got into virtual reality art tools about a year ago, and tried to monetize it, and was doing workshops and sessions in schools and hospitals and things like that, and then so I'm getting mad echo.
I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah, I'm getting the feedback too. Oh no. Do you have a headset handy? Maybe that'll work a little bit better. All right, I can't hear the echo now, but I can't hear you either.
While he's fixing that, we can.
Yeah. Oh, there. Sounds like you're back.
Let me test now.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
While he's fixing that. Yep. Feedback is gone.
Oh, there's still like a couple second delay. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
While he's fixing that. Yep. Feedback is gone.
There's still like a couple second delay. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
So Lee, is there a way to just select your headset as the primary
Sorry,
input and output?
It's even if I'm muting, it seems to be doing it.
Lee, is there a way to just select your headset as the primary
Sorry,
input and output?
It's even if I'm muting, it seems to be doing it.
Metaverse issues.
Exactly. And then I have now, I'm also going to share that I'm at Munich Airport, and so you may hear the odd announcement. Exactly. And then I have now, I'm going to mute myself. I'm also going to share that I'm at Munich Airport, and so you may hear those odd announcements. All right, so Lee is going to hopefully fix that scenario, and his work is fantastic. So it's at Metageist on Twitter and on Instagram as well. So Ian Forster, who I was fortunate to catch the tail end of his talk, was talking about self-sovereign identity. So I think maybe that's a good place to start. And then, self-sovereign identity relative to the metaverse. And I think also it'd be helpful just to sort of give, a sort of a light description of really what is self-sovereign identity, and then, how would you define the metaverse?
Yeah, so self-sovereign identity is a term for a standard. It's kind of the gold standard of digital identity. It comes from PGP moving into sort of the working groups that now make up like W3C and rebooting Web of Trust. And essentially the idea is that there's a new set of standards in order to form credentials, verifiable credentials. So we kind of use the credentials given by the government or for our use on the internet. It's usually an email, right? So we'll use our email and our password. Or if we log in with Facebook, which usually just our email, we're just logging in with Facebook. And self-sovereign identity is a new form of credential that is actually on-chain. So the same sort of tech that makes Bitcoin or any of these cryptocurrencies work, it's a way to prove your identity and prove a credential for a way to prove your identity in some relationship. So this is like, about 8 years or so, there's been working groups on these standards. And it's been adopted into a lot of different industries, banking, enterprise, government. When you hear about things like e-residencies with countries like Estonia, this is kind of, it stems from these concepts. And what we've done at Crucible is bring that into gaming. These standards have not made their way into gaming yet. There's been a lot of sort of threading issues with the libraries of code not compatible. So we've been working for about a year or two on that. But once you can kind of bring that user sovereignty and that ability to have a more secure and compliant credential, you can bring that into the game engine. We really see that as sort of the key substrate, essentially, of what is needed for the economy of the metaverse.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think you and I are both on Clubhouse, and I've been seeing the topics around the metaverse cropping up actually quite a bit. And I popped in on one where Philip Rosedale, who's the founder of Second Life and High Fidelity, and arguably one of the inventors of the actual metaverse, made a really interesting statement. And that statement was welcome back, Lee.
Hi, sorry about that.
And the statement was, when we built the metaverse, we had a very, very clear vision of what it was. And now that we're getting closer and closer to it, it's much harder to define. And I thought that was really interesting coming from him, who's been sort of living and breathing this notion for such a long time. I mean, I think it was 2003, I think, when Second Life opened up. So let's talk a little bit about that. And actually, so Lee, I'd love to hear, I do want to get back also to your work as well. So we'll weave that into the conversation. But really, how would you define the metaverse? And, as we get closer to it, what are some of the opportunities, especially for what you're doing and sort of these, and for creators?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes when the way people differentiate how they see what the word metaverse means. Some platforms describe what they're doing as the metaverse, and I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think the metaverse is the interconnectivity between all these different platforms. I would say that, I don't know if this is something that you guys would agree on, but the internet, from the beginning of the internet, so that's the very start of like a rudimentary metaverse. It's a way for people to communicate across the planet instantly, no matter where they are geographically. And then that is that's on an inevitable trajectory now to becoming much more immersive and much more embodied. And that's what we're seeing with virtual reality and things like that. I once saw somebody describe a blinking cursor on a Google Doc as an avatar, and that sort of blew my mind a little bit. And I thought that was quite interesting to say that is a sort of sense of somebody being in a place and you are sort of sharing a space with them. And that is a very sort of simple sort of example of that. And I think it's very important that whenever we talk about a metaverse, we have to talk about it in terms of being interoperable and connected and open. And that's why I think blockchain and NFT technology is fundamental to that, because until you've got something that you can carry with you, like an identity or an avatar or your belongings or your art gallery or whatever, then really you are still in these different walled gardens and silos. So the metaverse, to me, from my perspective, is reliant on blockchain. Without it, I think we will always have these things like not being able to take your skins out of Fortnite and not being able to keep things, because we like to collect, and we are defined by in part by how we present ourselves, but also by what we own. And I think it's important that that can be carried with us. And so that's broadly speaking how I would define metaverse, I think.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, just this evolution. I remember, when I first started hearing about Second Life and this notion that people were buying and selling digital goods and that they had actual value. And this was really before, I think, you really had this market for skins and sort of in-app purchasing and things like that. And I just found it was just implausible that people were actually buying and selling, things that didn't exist. And so here we are today, proven wildly wrong. But that evolution has been really, really interesting. And I think now more than ever, and you mentioned NFTs, and I'd like to talk about that. So can you, actually maybe Ryan, if you want to start, just also sort of explain the difference between, fungible and non-fungible tokens and sort of, what they mean in the metaverse?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I know there's a lot of technical folks in the audience, but I usually like to talk about these in a non-technical form. Fungibility really just means interchangeability, right? If you have a paper dollar and I have one, we can change them. And that doesn't really change the value or what they are. Non-fungibility is really like collectibles or unique items, things that are not interchangeable. There's a lot of technical arguments about whether Bitcoin is fungible. It's not as straight of an answer because of the hashes. But when you talk about a non-fungible token, it's essentially something that is unique and is provably scarce. So the first thing that's really kind of taken off with this is art and creativity. And we've seen, Cinema 4D, 3D artists sort of adopt this very quickly. A guy named Beeple was kind of the watershed moment. He spent, 14 years building his own world of, a unique work of art every single day. He's not missed one day, but he made his living with client services. He made a good living, but it was always brands and people coming to pay him to do some client work. And out of these everydays, he took sort of a section of the 2020 year of everydays and he auctioned it for 3.5 million. And he did that. That was his own work. It wasn't client work. And now on the secondary market, that's more than double. So people like Mike it's a watershed because the rest of the industry has watched that happen. And now they're on notice and they're all kind of moving into Super Rare and Nifty Gateway and these platforms. I very much see that the Clo 3D marvelous designer world of fashion will be next. We'll start seeing NFTs that are more fashion. I talk to brands here in Amsterdam, luxury brands and streetwear brands that are learning this lesson all the time. And then I think music as well, right? My friend Mike Darlington runs Monster Cat label, and he took the stage design like that he created for an arena tour that was canceled because of 2020. He worked with an artist to turn those into NFTs, and he cleared, almost $500,000 on that. And we have people like Deadmau5 coming in and starting to do it. So there's a lot of figures that are learning this lesson of NFTs, and it's going to be this sort of renaissance. I think we're on the cusp of a complete renaissance on how creatives think about their work. They'll be liberated a little from client services and really allowed to do the thing that it is within them. And then, relevant to this conversation is these are like building blocks to the metaverse. Eventually NFTs will make up world building. And you'll have supply and demand that you can scale through the way you build worlds, right? But right now there's little snapshots because there's file type limitations on chain. We're arguing whether it should even be on chain or off chain. But the significance of an NFT is really the proving of the ownership of the thing. So the way I describe this is like when you buy a bag, a Birkin bag, something that's very expensive, you're actually really not even spending money for the bag. You're spending it for the tag inside it that proves that it's authentic, that it's real, and that you own it. And then if there's a secondary market, the only way you can actually accept an offer on that secondary market is if you can prove ownership. So with all this art, it is true, you can screenshot it, right? People can take pictures, they can share it on their socials. Anybody can look at it, but only the person with the NFT can own it. And I think that's kind of the big significant,
Yeah, Yeah, and Lee, as a creator, what does that mean for you and some of the work that you're doing? And so there's sort of three components, right? There's there's origin or authenticity, however you want to call it, and then there's ownership, and then there's value, right? And it's sort of this nexus between three. And how are you defining the value of your work, and then secondary markets and where it goes from there, and how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think it's been a very interesting year since around March last year of finally being able to do what I'd always wanted to do, which was just create my own brand of weird art and have it pay the bills. It's a little bit of a barrier of entry on some of the platforms. It's a little bit, it's not easy at the moment. The user experience needs a lot of work. So it's a little bit of like, you just have to dip your toe in and assess how you go about selling your story as an artist, as an independent creator, and seeing how people respond to that, and seeing it, and the value comes from what people are willing to bid on it. So most of the time, I recommend that people go in with an auction model, tell their story, and that's a really big part of it, and then see what people, the value other people assign to that. I've spent 20 years doing graphic design, doing illustration, murals, government-funded community work, and anything and everything that meant that there would be like this period in the project where I could just be imaginative and creative and do something that I like. But then, of course, sort of like you've got somebody else and you're trying to help somebody else sell something or whatever, and so you're sort of like selling your creative energy for the benefit of something that you wouldn't necessarily done so otherwise. So for artists, it's incredibly empowering, and it's, if anything, the daunting thing is now I can do whatever I want. What do I do? It turns out that mine are insects with tentacles. I don't know where I'm going with it at the moment, but like, no, I'm starting with like collectibles as a tried and tested model for selling your own sort of designs. But it's amazing. I had a very good 2020 basically, and I highly recommend anybody to look at it, and don't be put off by the acronyms and in this weird hard to understand sort of vernacular that it's still shrouded in at the moment, because it's getting easier and easier to understand, and the market is booming. And we live in a world where nearly $2 billion are spent on skins in Fortnite in a year. So the younger generation aren't going to question the value of digital items at all. They don't at all. It's and so this is the way things can be. So I'll find it very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, just to drop a couple numbers on that, because I want to just add to what you said. The three top biggest gaming companies that are free to play make a couple billion a year in skin sales. So collectively, it's probably closer to 5 or 6 total. And even though that's the case now, and gaming is exploding, about 63% of players want to spend more money on those things if there's a real world value to it. Because a lot of this generation is learning through Web3 about the real world value of digital goods, right? Cryptocurrencies, plots of land, now NFTs. And so it's only a matter of time until that lesson is brought from the bottom up as sort of a pressure from the players. And some publishers and developers do move to this, more of a model where these skins and these assets have real world value. There's a secondary market to it.
Yeah, sorry, we have the I should be wearing a mask announcement, but just to be clear, I'm in the far corner, and literally our flight is the only flight that's next, and there's only 4 of us here. So I'm not, disobeying rules and infecting anyone, but but they are making announcements regularly. So yeah, and I'd like to kind of even sort of project this more into the future, sort of around portable identity, and when we really start to be able to kind of move between worlds, and you referred to the connectivity. I mean, that's sort of the gold standard that we want to reach, right? It's so that we're able to kind of move between worlds and kind of create our own experience, and a lot of that hinges not just on portable identity, but the identity that we want to portray in the metaverse can really be anything. And as far as social fabric and social constructs of behaviors and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, I think that opens up a whole new realm of opportunity, not just for us to express ourselves in a much more creative way, but also to engender a better understanding of one another as humans sort of in the real world. And again, I'm going to use Ryan's term, protopian view, because it could all go horribly wrong, and there is going to be some deep, dark, ugly factions of the metaverse as well. But let's sort of talk about kind of what the opportunity is and how you see this kind of scaling and the way that we're going to interact both as digital humans and real humans.
I think it's
back to you.
Sorry, it is very, very much early days, but I've only recently sort of it's sunk in that my Ethereum wallet that I use to log into these different art platforms and metaverse sort of platforms is immutable and transparent. Anyone can have access to it. You can look into anybody's Ethereum wallet and see the transactions, see what they're doing in terms of their decentralized finance, how much money they've spent on Ethereum, which I don't recommend ever looking at. How many and your artwork that's collected, and soon that will be your avatar, and it will be everywhere you've been, everywhere you've interacted, what you've chosen to do with your time as an artist. If you choose to try and break the rules and maybe like remint a piece of artwork on another platform, you're only going to get away with that once before not only is someone going to see it happen and your reputation is shot, but it's also like indelibly carved into the blockchain for all to see forevermore. So the social connotations of it are just unfathomable. Like we can't possibly predict how this is going to sort of develop into the future, but in a sense it's quite interesting that not everything, but vast majority of what you do attached to the blockchain is there and is carried with you, and your history is there. So I think that's rather than just sort of like playing in decentralized finance models and throwing coins around and then buying the odd bit of art, I've started to realize that my wallet is now my portfolio. It's my art collection, and anything that I haven't sold of mine is in there as well. And I can't imagine how like metaverse platforms in the future will choose to represent that. Will that dynamically appear in your VR penthouse? Will you have like a rucksack that you can carry around that you can choose to say what you share and what you don't share? Could you have an avatar with like overlays that shows your I don't know, your political leanings, your sexual leanings, or whatever? Like, how do you express yourself? Do you have something that dynamically represents you depending on what you've done over the last sort of month? Does it change? Does it grow? Yeah, it's just, the mind boggles at the potential, really.
Ryan, I know you and I talk about this a lot, so I know you have some things to say about how this might evolve.
Yeah, I mean, our company is really about the user and making them a first-class citizen in this. So the way I look at this is, this might be one of the only blank slates to kind of start all over again that we'll have, right? And it seems to me that the gatekeepers of the old world are not the first to move into this, and when they do try to move into it, the community doesn't really feel that it's authentic, and they're not as embraced, right? This is something that comes from the people. So for us, this is a movement that has to be so much bigger than our company. And so, we really kind of take it seriously that like all cultures should really have a part in this, especially ones that haven't had a part in the way things have been done so far. And so all these subcultures that exist is really how we feel like it's going to roll out. We've talked about like music, fashion, and gaming as the broad ones, but going to like these organizations of able gamers, right? So that we make sure that this is accessible for people who aren't the main subset of group of people who have defined these things. Amy, you and I were talking earlier today about how prior defining the metaverse was a lot more straightforward and simple. And as we actually get closer to it being reality, it almost disintegrates and it becomes so much more nuanced. And I think that's because, it was defined by a subset of people that had a life experience, and it was easy for them to say, well, this is what it will be. And that might have been Neil Stephenson and William Gibson, the minds that came up with this and inspired the Philip Rosedales and onward. But now that it's becoming real, everybody has some ownership to it. Everybody has some claim to it, and it's going to be so different for everybody who chooses to express themselves a certain way in it. So I think we'll even be walking around in it and spending time in it, and we won't be able to really pin down an actual definition. But the economy, I think, is pretty definable. For me, we think of this as a direct to avatar economy. All right, we've gone through this shift of direct to consumer, where the supply chain was maybe 40% dematerialized, and now it's almost going through the rest of dematerialization, where like brands will sell things directly to avatars in a fully digital supply chain. And so all of the sort of brands of the world, especially consumer focused ones, are like really starting to learn this lesson and figure this out. So I think that's the most interesting thing to think about how it will evolve, is as a stakeholder in some sort of business, or if you're selling a product, instead of just looking at this like another marketing, sort of, let me just put a billboard up in a virtual world. Like, think about how you shift into a direct to avatar mindset, understand game engine technology, add that to your stack of how you do business. And I think the ones that do that quick are going to sort of be the ones that move into it and take a lead.
I would be very unhappy if we start getting banner ads in the metaverse. I think it's such a sort of waste of what the opportunity is, and I think that that also kind of bleeds into that notion of value and the sort of peer-to-peer economy construct as well. On the value of goods is exactly what someone's willing to pay for it, and I think that there's also an opportunity for us to maybe we sell an object to one person for one price and then to somebody else for another price. And that's really just up to the two people in that kind of process. But I want to kind of loop back to something that Lee said, which is, will we have our preferences, as part of our avatar? And I think that, we're in this day and age where we're very, very, concerned about how our data is being used. But I think we also don't understand what it's going to take. I have to go on a walkabout because I have to find a charger, but what it's going to take for us to manage our data, right? There has to be a relatively simple interface. And then it's not just about managing the data, then it's sort of understanding, okay, this is the data, this is my private data, this is going to be sort of my public persona in the metaverse, which will be, to Lee's point, an ever shifting set of data points. But then, how far do we take that? Do we, I was sharing a story earlier that someone made a comment to me on my flight here to Munich and made an assumption about what I did for a living. And it was so confounding how he came up with what he came up with. And I wasn't necessarily insulted by it, but I can see someone else being insulted by it. And so, is there an opportunity for us to sort of exchange these maybe like personal parameter tokens, right? Let's define it. Let's do a new acronym, and PPT, right? Where you sort of exchange like, I like to be called this. I don't like to be, I don't like, my looks to be referred to, or my gender to be referred to, or it doesn't bother me. You are welcome to say this, this, and this. And then where does that begin and end? And does that sort of take the fun out of getting to know people? And I think this might be an interesting topic for exploration. And I'd let you two go on that while I find an outlet before my Mac goes to sleep.
I've always thought it'd be interesting to have like the way you present yourself is different depending on who's looking at you. There's no reason why it needs to be a single avatar or a single representation of yourself. You could choose over time to reveal more of yourself, like the equivalent of having like ghosting when you don't know somebody in a virtual space.
Yeah, I think all of these come down to moderation. When all of this stuff is being used at scale, and like millions and billions of people are in the metaverse constantly clashing, and all these different subcultures and worldviews are clashing, like moderation becomes a really important thing. How we do that at scale, and how do we not censor, but knowing that like it's been demonstrated over and over that people come in and draw dicks and swastikas, right? And so what is that pocket, and how do we prevent that, or how do we keep it a safe space for people? This is probably one of the biggest things that we'll have to discuss over the next several years. We already see it in places like Clubhouse, as like this sort of collapsed social experiment where they just let everything fly. You can kind of do anything in there, and there's all kinds of like toxic rooms that pop up and problems with all kinds of stuff. So when you actually do things in a diverse way where everybody's a part of it, it does get messy, and so I think we're going to have to think ahead of a lot of moderation.
I know that Somnium Space are working on a feature where, and Somnium Space is an online blockchain-based metaverse project platform that sells land for tens of thousands of dollars at the moment. But it's still very, very early days. But they're working on a model where, unless you happen to have a specific token in your wallet, you can't access a building, for instance. So it's like having a ticket, or having a VIP membership card or whatever. And you could very easily make it so that if you don't have that NFT, that token in your wallet, you can't even see that art gallery or that museum on that night or whatever. Or it could be a different version. You can have things that sort of like plan in advance and allow like a chosen, a select few of people in to enjoy that event or whatever.
But I think, Ryan brought up another good point, which is, I think that this is the opportunity for us to kind of collectively decide, what are the sort of next version of the social mores, and, are there ways for people, kind of on the fringe with opinions that are kind of not the norm, or, some people might consider offensive, but can that live somewhere where it's quite clear to outsiders what they're getting into, and then they can make an informed choice. Do I want to be part of this conversation, or do I want to avoid it? And I think so. It's an opportunity. There's also, again, a lot that could go horribly awry. But Clubhouse, I think, is a good example. I think it's we're learning as we go, right? All right, I have the right plug now. And I'm going to I've got 4% left, so wish me luck. So I'm going to throw another question out here while I get plugged in. So let's go back to that kind of notion of value as well, because we really can redefine value, and even NFTs for physical goods as well, and where that realm takes us. And do you see a complete parallel economy kind of happening in the metaverse? And then how is it blended then with the real world? Ryan, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, just to that point, like I think one of the most important emergent sort of properties of tech is that it's become very philosophical, right? Like we've gotten technology into our society to a point where like the new technology makes people ask questions. And I'm not necessarily talking about like the next social media app, but Bitcoin had a collective generation asking, what is money, right? People that maybe had never even reflected on what is money or what is value. They were just sort of generationally handed a system and a thing, and they bought into it. With NFTs, we have this sort of collective question of what is art, right? We're beginning to reflect on that again and realize that there's not one answer for it. Everybody kind of feels very differently about that. So I think before we can really jump into defining this and grasping it and knowing what it is, we all collectively need to ask these questions, because we don't have the answers, and we need to spend the time understanding each other better, right? I don't think that there maybe is a objective truth or reality that everybody can fit into, but we do need to ask these questions to kind of reflect on them. And these are important questions to ask before we go and define whatever this next thing is. And I just put that front and center because I find so many people are trying to debate on the metaverse in terms of proprietary or not. Like, are there dominant metaverses? Is there one? Are there many? Is Facebook going to win? Or if I'm a company, what does that mean for me? How do I create a metaverse? And it's just like, we're going to take the same thing we're going to take Web 2 into Web 3. And that's pretty toxic and dangerous. And I think technology is giving us this opportunity to ask these questions and to reflect on these things, and that's important.
I think the other important thing is that, we all have to be involved in the conversation. I think, I find, I have a friend, I don't want to slam Nextdoor because I think that they personally, tried to really make a great product. The problem is in the hands of people with too much time on their hands. And, a friend of mine called it, getoffmylawn.com, where people are just whining about these really mundane things. And I think, part of the responsibility is, the next generations, for whom this will be sort of the native realm for them, I really have to be part of the conversation and build this metaverse in a way that, they believe is the right path, but have more voices in the conversation. And, Ryan, you just said, it was like a subset of people kind of defined what it was back then, and had their particular perspective and purview. But this is, ideally, a world for all of us and everyone, built by all of us. But we have to participate. We have to put in the work and the effort to build the standards and to build the social constructs that we're going to take into this next world, and certainly improve upon what we're doing now, because there's a lot of great things, but there's also some things that are just wildly disturbing.
I think you might be surprised. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if there are people who maybe feel confused about hearing like Web 3 or Web 2, I'm sure not in this audience, but just in case there is, the best way to think of it is like Web 1 was the beginning of the internet as like dial-up, and the general philosophy was that the internet is for end users, right? It was about networking. It was about the possibility of what a network species could become. And then starting with the .com, really Web 2 was a shift into like the internet being for shareholders. It was about business models being created, which was great at the time. But what we find ourselves in today is this sort of macro advertising model that looks at people as products and actually generates an incredible amount of revenue adversarial to them by giving them free products that are convenient. And I mean, it's okay if that's for targeting advertising, right? Like, or giving you a better experience, but to take that model into eye tracking and brain computer interfacing, it's just it's a toxic way to go. And so Web 3 is this sort of what we call a crucible moment, right? It's like we get to make a decision here on whether we're going to break it down and change it into something else. And Web 3 has to be based off of this user sovereignty and this decentralization, and as long as it is, then we can have the VR and the AR and the metaverse on top of it, and it can be a really great thing. But if we continue to move this Web 2 design of things where people don't own their data, you're fractioned across many different servers, and ultimately your data that you're contributing is also training models that replace you with a lot of parts of the world. It's a problem and an issue. So I wish there was more education on like that story of the chapters or the acts of the internet, and like we're entering the third act of the internet. We get to kind of change and decide if people want to choose themselves. And so I saw a question in here: what does it mean to be a first-class citizen? It means that you have agency, you have ownership of your data, you can manage and express yourself however you want to, and then all the value that you contribute can be accrued back to you. So in the metaverse, if you're contributing something of value, then this should actually be a way to make a living. And we're just not in that design yet, but Crucible is really designed around those principles. We hope to make that happen.
Yeah, I'd like to run in some questions here as well. So we've got a few. The one from Ian said that there's a tension between selling more skins, goods, and identity versus bring your own SSID. So is there a platform that would allow for this, and who might be the first?
That's kind of what we're hoping to help draw and catalyze. I think we want to be a rising tide, but essentially from a gaming perspective, if you look at the industry, there's the industry in general with like Epic, Ubisoft, Amazon, Microsoft. It's in a federated model for identity. And again, you're using like your email and credential for all that stuff, and it's in the servers of those companies. if we can be successful with like bringing 25 to 50% of those federated identities to a decentralized model, I think we'll start to look like we have the substrate, you know, for this kind of thing. And then it's really just about that user sovereignty, right? The economics on top of that, the secondary markets, the skins, all the art and creativity is what will emerge from people's lives and creativities and expression. But until we get that like bottom layer of user sovereignty, I think we're just going to see a lot of the same.
Yeah. And then there's a question for Lee, and I actually like this because it's very kind of, you know, brass tacks, and it says, what is your delivered artwork format, and what do people get, and what can they do with it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I get asked a lot. For me, the drop I did a few days ago, they're just video files, and those video files themselves aren't on the blockchain. What you purchase is you purchase the receipt, the certificate of authenticity for that piece, and then that has associated assets. So that it could be a 3D model, it could be a video, it could be a GIF, it could be what, you know, whatever. There are examples of fully on-chain artwork, but they're very rudimentary. They're pixel artwork, really. That, you know, you're very limited into what you can store. But in conjunction with IPFS, which is like this forever hard drive, is a way of putting it, interplanetary file system, I think it's called. The idea is that it's online storage in the cloud that will never die. It will always be there. That working in conjunction with the NFT model could theoretically mean that anything can be attached to that. But ultimately, what you purchase is the certificate of ownership. And at the beginning of that, when that was first minted onto the blockchain, it's got me as the artist, a little bit of metadata attached to it, as much as you can. The platforms vary wildly as to how much they put into the metadata, but that the metadata will tell you that there was an associated image or video or whatever. What I do is I tell anyone who buys my video NFT of one of my sculptures that they can contact me, and I can send them that file in any format they like. So the sculptures can be 3D printed, or they can be brought into VR spaces, VR chat, and things like that. But at the moment, it's a case of really you just get the receipt, but that can't be copied, and that is immutable and transparent on the blockchain, and that in itself is enough to give something value. And we saw a low resolution JPEG of a punk sell for over $1 million because it was one of the first NFTs minted on the Ethereum blockchain. So it certainly seems to be enough for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a fascinating thing, but I think we will get to the point where, you know, people will want to sort of proudly display these digital assets in a space that can be their personal space, or, you know, even the way they do now, where they might, you know, loan a piece of artwork to a museum. There may be these kind of, galleries, metaverse galleries, that you may say, all right, you know, you can have this on display for, you know, X period of time.
Yeah.
And I think it'll all change. And I think there'll be even sort of another way that we sort of make our, you know, art available, whether you created it or whether you've purchased it, available for others to enjoy. And I think there'll be some real creativity around even how that evolves.
My own pieces are designed as sculptures. So in the simplest sense, it's something that you can put up in your gallery if you're in crypto voxels or VR chat or various different spaces. But that could be a fully immersive experience. That could be a whole level of a game that is held within an NFT that only you have access to. Then you decide to do what you like with it in the same, and you could then charge people. You could sell that experience, and then the person who buys that NFT then has full copyright and control over what they do with that experience and whether or not they want to add to it or change it or whatever. Yeah, so it's really early days. There's lots and lots of galleries that show flat artwork, videos, and GIFs on the walls of VR spaces, and you can put a headset on, walk up to it, click it, purchase it within a few seconds. The artist will be paid, and also if it's a secondary sale, the original artist will get royalties, a 10% or whatever royalty as well, more or less instantly paid into their bank account, which is, having done 6 or 7 months of this now, I'm starting to realize is actually is becoming a significant, or at least enough to make a difference, passive income. So yeah, the next step really is having these three-dimensional things. What I did, one of my events in VR a few months ago, one of the artists whose sculptures I bought, we had it on stage in this like little dingy little club that I built, and we talked to the artist, and then I flick a switch and that sculpture then becomes 8 stories high, and we're flying and there's music playing. So that was kind of like early days, but that's an example of the sort of things you can do. And that 3D object is in my wallet as my NFT, and it's something that I'm proudly showing off to the people coming to my event. So that's, that sort of thing is like, it's a nice simple example of what you can do with it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And then here's a tough one. How can the metaverse be moderated with AI or humans? Well, certainly not AI by itself, but AI or humans. I mean, I'll pass this to both of you, but I would kind of not like to see, again, sort of the point. I think it has to self-regulate, and I think, again, we all have to be kind of part of that. But I think we need to be given the tools to be able to moderate environments that we are part of, and that may just be in control sort of ourselves and what we see as well as what we share, so that we have control of sort of the input and the output. But Ryan, what are your thoughts on the moderation of the metaverse?
Moderation is the challenge, right? I think we have to have it be community driven, and I think we need to provide each person the tools in order to make the decision for themselves, right? I think we'll never completely get rid of the side of human behavior that's going to make that a problem, but we can, I think, empower the individual a little bit more to have some choices around what they allow around them, or what they can see and what they can't see. Now, that also could be an issue. You go too far and you create these like walled sort of echo chambers. You don't want that, but it's a balance. But I believe that it should be the choice of the person, and I think these things should be voted on as a community. There's all kinds of like quadratic voting primitives and things that we can be testing with and experimenting with, but ultimately it needs to be something that the community drives themselves, and it's all based off of the reputation of what happens to you when you're a bad actor.
Mm-hmm. And Lee, what are your thoughts there? Maybe even within the art world.
I think what we're finding is you're drawn to the platforms that suit your level of that expected moderation. So you'll end up with these cultures forming based on what is most comfortable for the people who visit that metaverse platform. Like I was thinking earlier, we're talking about the younger generation are the ones that are going to be living in this. We need to think about them. But I think we'd be surprised how many hundreds of thousands of teenagers and children already have like a place that they visit, and rules and a culture that we like on Roblox or Fortnite or wherever, that we're not really party to and never will be. And people generally do sort of self moderate. If like the real world, if you're trying not to swear, you're going to lose. You're not going to make friends, right? You're going to get kicked out of places, and that sort of thing does happen sort of like organically. There are some platforms where you can't teleport, except the guy who owns the platform can, and I think things like that are weird, and it needs to be fair, and that's one of the challenges. But in terms of AI moderating, like, oh, God knows where that could end up.
Yeah, that's
virtual bouncers is not a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you what, though, if you think about the power that you could have, if you could just like delete somebody from the metaverse essentially, and not allow them into, the amount of power that the people owning and running these platforms have is significant, and that's dangerous as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do have to be careful of that. So I think a lot of the power has to be also around. I think in an alt space, or there's one of them where you can just sort of put a bubble around yourself if someone is acting in a peculiar way. And again, like different demographics, like if you look at sort of gaming culture, you know, like I listened to my, son when he was younger, and they're just sort of trash talking all the time. And some of the things he was saying, I would just be like, really? Like, this is how you're communicating with somebody? But it's just sort of the norm, right? But that's not the norm in other cultures or other kind of group cultures. And so again, I think that the opportunity is for all of us to kind of have a say in, this works for me personally, this works for us sort of generally as humans, and that is not for me, but if it's for somebody else, great. But again, I think there's so many pitfalls that we don't even understand yet, because the complexity here is vast. So we are really running short of time. So I'd love to just give each of you just a couple of moments to just share some final thoughts on, let's leave on a high note on just sort of like, what the positive impact could be of the metaverse, and then we'll hand it back over to Mark. So Lee, why don't you give a sort of quick minute summary of your hopes and dreams for the metaverse in 60 seconds or less.
Yeah, okay, sure. I mean, all I can say is that for anybody with an urge to be creative, any artists out there, I'd highly recommend stepping into this world now, right at the very beginning, dealing with how sort of intimidating it can be at times, and sort of like get a footing in the space, because the validation you get from people by purchasing your artwork because they love it, and buying and selling it on a secondary marketplace, and that paying the bills, and regardless of how weird it is just like, yeah, it's amazing. And I'm just excited, and there's too many opportunities. There's so much out there. You can easily find your space in there. I think that's ideal for you.
Right, Ryan?
Well, you could go to crucible.network, and really it's an extension of my co-founder and I, and what we're excited about. But I did see a question in here that was asked multiple times and was flagged. And so I want to give it its time. They were asking about some of the environmental impacts around crypto art. And this is something that usually comes up a lot anytime there's an all-time high. On one hand, this is a lot of sort of like fear and uncertainty being circulated about the blockchain. And it is true that like Bitcoin proof of work is based off of computation and use of power, but you have to also pull back and realize, like, as a human race, we have a real problem with our use of energy. And so we have to collectively all decide to change that. I think Ethereum-based crypto art is very low on the list of the impact. Bitcoin proof of work is probably a lot higher, but there's a real opportunity for the incentives of the way Bitcoin works to actually drive us to cleaner forms of energy. Because if we're using that computation power for something that's storing a lot of the world's value, then we can remove our centers of, like, say, a specific city in terms of how we have energy. We can actually create that in the world somewhere where it's actually more conducive, and we can move to cleaner, more sustainable forms of energy. So it's not necessarily the thing that we're doing with it, like, mining Bitcoin or creating cryptocurrency, minting NFTs. It's really our use of energy on Earth. And if you go to Michael Saylor and Ross Stevens, there's an interview that they just did together, and they talked a lot about this. The crypto art specific side of things is actually looking to be more of a net positive, because industries like fashion, they waste so much, right? There's so much surplus, there's so much waste. It's a very unsustainable industry. And by making these things digital and actually creating scarcity with them, it's solving a lot of that waste, and it's also moving the entire industry to something that's potentially more sustainable. So on one hand, it's true that these forms of sort of consensus use a lot of power, but we have to be careful not to demonize the thing that's happening, and actually go to the deeper root of, like, how we use energy and the forms of energy that we use all over the world. That's really the issue.
Yeah, I feel like we just barely scratched the surface here, and we're out of time. It's such a big topic, but I hope to everyone listening, we provided a little bit of value and some things to really think about and consider. And maybe we'll get to come back and and do even deeper dive. And I'm going to hand it back over to Mark now. Thank you, Ryan and Lee. It's a pleasure chatting with you. And thank you, Mark.
Big round of applause in the chat for everybody there. Thanks, Ryan, Lee, and Amy. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. We're gonna switch this off in a minute. This stage is going to close down, and then we're going to be bringing Mike up, who's going to talk about OpenBrush. And well, that conversation did start off with Polly. Did Google killing Polly, and then they released Tiltbrush code, and then Mike and his team created some amazing stuff. So he's going to talk about that for 20 minutes. So we're going to have a kind of we'll be back at 1:15. So whatever that is, 8 minutes. Going to run to the loo. You might want to do that as well, and grab a cup of tea, something like that. And then Mike's going to come on, and we'll be picking up the time. So thank you very much, everybody. And yeah, I'll see you shortly. So see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.